My name is Thomas Hale. I'm 70 years old, and this is the story of how, on the day I was supposed to celebrate my life, I almost lost it at the hands of the very people who shared my blood. People often think death comes quietly with sickness or age, but sometimes death wears the face of someone you once carried in your arms. The night of my 70th birthday was supposed to be filled with laughter, warmth, and the clinking of glasses. My children had told me to expect a surprise. For weeks they whispered on the phone, they bought decorations, they insisted I dress well. When I entered the room, I saw candles, balloons, and a long table laid out with food and gifts. For a moment, my heart swelled with pride. 70 years of life, 70 years of struggle, and my family stood around me smiling. I thought perhaps I had done something right after all. But then the moment came. My eldest son raised a crystal bottle of wine, red and shimmering in the light. He poured it with exaggerated care, filling my glass higher than anyone else's. To Father, he said, his smile stretching too wide, too forced. The others clapped. I picked up the glass, and as I lifted it, I felt eyes pressing into me, waiting. That was when my daughter leaned close. She is the youngest, my little Rose, the only one whose face still carried the softness of genuine love. Her lips barely moved, but I heard her words as clearly as if she had shouted them into my ear. "Dad, don't drink the wine." I froze. The room blurred, the candle flames flickered, and the glass trembled in my hand. I looked at her, and in her eyes I saw fear, not celebration. Fear for me. My chest tightened, and the noise of the party fell into a muffled silence like I was standing underwater. I turned my gaze back to my sons, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in their smiles I had never dared to imagine. Expectation, not of joy, but of an ending. In that instant, everything I thought I knew about my family collapsed. Could it be true? Could my own children want me gone? I had always believed the betrayal came from strangers from the outside. But as I stood there clutching that poison chalice, I understood the most dangerous enemies are often the ones who sit at your own table. My hand shook. I pretended to adjust my glasses, buying time. My daughter's whisper echoed again, "Don't drink." My mind raced. Was it possible she had misunderstood? Was it paranoia? Or was this the moment my life ended, not from old age, not from illness, but from betrayal? I forced a smile, raised the glass high, and said, "To family." Their cheers erupted, but I did not take a sip. I only touched the rim to my lips, letting the liquid brush my mouth without entering. In that second, I made a silent vow I would uncover the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Because if the warning was real, then my own sons had just tried to kill me. That night, as the candles flickered and the laughter rang hollow, I felt the weight of 70 years pressing on me, not as a celebration, but as a sentence. And as I looked at the faces of my children, I realized something I had never wanted to admit. The people you love the most can be the ones who bury you first. So, I ask you, if you were standing in my shoes, glass in hand, with the eyes of your family watching, and your daughter whispered those words, would you still take that drink comment with the number 1 if you would refuse just like I did? Before I tell you how my 70th birthday turned into a battlefield, you need to understand why that night cut so deep. Because betrayal only wounds when there was once love, and my family, for a long time, we were everything to each other. I was 24 when I married Eleanor. She was the kind of woman who carried the sun in her smile and the storm in her eyes. She was strong, sharper than me in many ways, and yet gentle enough to make me believe in the goodness of the world. We had almost nothing when we started out. I was a carpenter scraping by with odd jobs, and she worked part-time at a bakery. We lived in a rented one-room flat where the walls were thin and the neighbors were loud, but to us it was paradise because we had each other. When our first son Richard was born, I felt as if the universe had placed a crown on my head. I held him in my arms and thought, this is it. This is the meaning of life. 2 years later, Matthew arrived quieter, more observant than his brother. He didn't cry much, but he watched everything with those dark, steady eyes. And then, after a long wait, came Rose, my little girl, my unexpected gift when I was already 40. She was the light of my later years, softening my heart when I thought it could not grow any larger. Those early days were hard. Money was always short. I worked long hours building cabinets and repairing roofs, and Eleanor stretched every dollar like it was gold. Yet, in the evenings when I came home covered in sawdust, my children would run to me, climbing over my legs, demanding piggyback rides. Eleanor would stand in the kitchen doorway, flower on her cheek, smiling at the chaos. In those moments, I believed we were the richest family alive. We didn't have fancy vacations or expensive toys. Our treasures were simpler picnics at the park, Eleanor's apple pie cooling on the windowsill, late nights around the radio, laughing at the same old jokes. On Sundays, we would all squeeze into the church pew, the children restless, Eleanor humming softly. I remember holding her hand, feeling her squeeze every time one of the boys misbehaved and trying not to laugh. Those small, ordinary moments are what build a fortress of trust around your heart. You begin to believe nothing can ever tear it down. As the children grew, I tried to teach them dignity. A man's word is his bond, I used to tell them. Richard was ambitious, always talking about business deals and how one day he would be rich. I encouraged his drive, though sometimes I worried it burned too hot. Matthew was quieter, but clever. He liked numbers, could add faster in his head than I could with paper. I told him he would be the steady one, the one who kept his brother grounded. And Rose, well, she was different. While the boys fought and chased, she stayed near Eleanor, helping in the kitchen, humming to herself. She had Eleanor's heart, that softness that could heal without words. When Eleanor fell sick, everything changed. The years of work had worn me down, and the doctor's bills mounted higher than I could bear. I spent nights staring at unpaid papers, wondering how I would keep the roof above us. Through it all, the children were supposed to be my hope. They promised me they would take care of things that we would get through together. And for a time, I believed them. Eleanor passed on a cold winter morning. I held her hand until the warmth left it, and when the priest lowered her into the ground, I thought half of me went with her. Rose clung to my coat, her tears soaking through. Richard and Matthew stood still, too proud to cry, but their jaws clenched as if holding back an ocean. In that moment, despite my grief, I thought, at least I still have them. My children will be my anchor, and for a while they were. The boys helped with the shop. Rose cared for me like I was the child. We ate dinners together, trying to keep Eleanor's traditions alive. I told myself we would heal, that love was enough. I trusted them completely. If anyone had told me then that those same sons would one day look at me not as a father, but as an obstacle, I would have laughed in their face. That is why the whisper on my birthday shattered me so deeply. Because it wasn't coming from strangers. It wasn't even coming from distant relatives. It was coming from the very people whose first steps I had cheered, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose dreams I had sacrificed for. Back then in those golden years, I thought betrayal was something that happened in stories, not in my home. And when I raised that poison glass, all those memories came flooding back, the weight of trust I had built brick by brick, now crumbling into dust. Do you believe a family that once felt unbreakable can turn into a battlefield? If you do, comment yes, because I learned the answer in the hardest way imaginable. Looking back, I realized the warning signs were always there. They were small at first, easy to dismiss, almost invisible when wrapped in the routine of family life. But the truth is, betrayal never begins with a loud crash. It starts with whispers, with glances, with questions that cut just a little too deep. It began with Richard, my eldest. After Eleanor's death, he took it upon himself to handle business matters. He told me it was time to modernize, to make investments, to stop living like a man tied to the past. He would sit across from me at the kitchen table, papers spread out, his voice, smooth, persuasive. Dad, sign here. It's just a transfer to make things easier. You'll thank me when the profits come in. His tone carried the confidence of a man who thought he knew more than his father. I wanted to believe him. I told myself it was good he was taking initiative. But there was something in his eyes, too eager, too calculating, that unsettled me. Then came Matthew, always the quiet one, but silence can hold darker secrets than words. I began noticing him sneaking out late at night, phone pressed close to his ear. Once I heard raised voices outside the house, men cursing, demanding payment. When I stepped out, the men disappeared, and Matthew insisted it was just a misunderstanding. He laughed it off, but the laugh didn't reach his eyes. Soon after, I discovered envelopes missing from the drawer where I kept our savings. He swore he hadn't touched it, but who else could it have been? I told myself maybe I had miscounted. Maybe grief had clouded my memory. But deep down, I knew. Even Rose, sweet Rose, began to notice. She would frown at the boys' hushed conversations, the way they stopped talking whenever I entered the room. Once she whispered, "Dad, they're planning something," but I silenced her. "Don't speak like that about your brothers," I said. "They're family." I wanted so badly to believe in that word, family. I clung to it like a man clings to a life raft in stormy seas. The dinners changed too. Where once there had been laughter and shared stories, there was now tension so thick it could choke you. Richard spoke of profits and investments. Matthew stared into his plate, and Rose tried to fill the silence with small talk that nobody answered. Sometimes I caught Richard and Matthew exchanging glances quick and sharp, like knives passed under the table. It made my skin crawl, but I swallowed the feeling. The real breaking point, though, came one afternoon when Richard cornered me in the living room. "Dad," he said, his tone too casual, "you're not getting any younger. Maybe it's time to start thinking about arrangements? You know, inheritance, wills, insurance, just to make things easier." He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't belong to a son. It belonged to a predator circling its prey. My throat tightened. I tried to laugh it off, but the words lodged in my chest. Arrangements. At 70 was I already nothing but a ledger to my own children? From then on, I couldn't ignore the signs. My health became a topic of conversation far too often. Richard would ask how I was sleeping, how my heart felt, if I had been to the doctor lately. The concern sounded hollow, rehearsed. Matthew avoided my eyes altogether, his hands always trembling slightly as if stained by something he couldn't wash off. I remember one night waking to the sound of voices outside my door, Richard and Matthew speaking in low tones. "We can't wait forever," Richard hissed. "He's stubborn, but the day will come." My stomach turned to ice. I pushed the door open, but the hallway was empty. They had slipped away before I could catch them. And yet I still told myself I was imagining things. Because what father wants to admit his children might be plotting his end? It was easier to believe in mistakes and stress and coincidence. To admit the truth would be to shatter the very foundation of my life. But the cracks were spreading wider and wider. Every question about money, every missing dollar, every secretive glance, they were the silent hammer blows breaking the walls of trust. By the time my birthday approached, the fortress I had once built with love and sacrifice was already crumbling. I just didn't know how close it was to collapsing completely. Tell me, have you ever ignored the warning signs because the truth was too painful to face? If you have, comment the number 8, because that was me clinging to lies just to keep my world intact. The days leading up to my birthday should have been filled with joy. 70 years on this earth is no small milestone, and I expected perhaps a dinner, a cake, maybe a few photographs for the mantelpiece. Instead, what I found were shadows creeping into corners I had once trusted. It began when I went to the bank to withdraw money for repairs on the house. The teller greeted me with the kind of nervous smile people wear when they know something you don't. She hesitated, then handed me the ledger. My account was lighter by nearly $20,000. My hand shook as I turned the pages searching for the withdrawal slip. There it was, neat and signed, my name scrawled in ink that looked like mine but wasn't. My stomach dropped. Someone had forged me. I thought perhaps it was a mistake, a clerical error. But when I asked, the teller said calmly, "Your son Richard brought the paperwork. He explained you were unwell and didn't want the trouble of coming in yourself." Her words cut through me like a blade. Richard, my firstborn. The boy I had carried on my shoulders. The boy I had taught to hammer nails and tie knots. He had stolen from me, and worse, he had worn my name like a mask to do it. I went home, rage simmering beneath my ribs. But when I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad, you don't need that money. I'm investing it for the family, for us. You should be thanking me." His tone was calm, confident, like he believed the theft was a gift. I wanted to strike him to scream, but my voice came out as a whisper. "You used my name?" He shrugged. "It's just business." That night, as I sat alone in my bedroom, I thought about Eleanor. What would she say if she knew our son had stolen from me? What would she say if she knew the boy we raised to be honorable had turned into a stranger in our own home? My chest ached not from age, but from grief deeper than the grave. And then there was Matthew. His shadow was quieter, but no less dangerous. I stumbled upon him in the garage one evening, his phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp. "I told you you'll get the money. Once it's done, the payout will be enough to cover everything." He turned when he saw me, his face pale, and the phone call ended abruptly. I asked him what it meant, who he was speaking to, but he only muttered, "Nothing, Dad. Just a friend." His hands were shaking, his jaw clenched. I recognized the look. It was the look of a man cornered by debts he couldn't pay. Still, I tried to hold on to the hope that I was imagining things. I told myself maybe I was too suspicious, maybe grief had poisoned my thoughts. But then came the words I was never meant to hear. It was a week before my birthday. I was in the hallway late at night on my way to the bathroom when I heard them. Richard and Matthew voices, low but urgent, carrying through the thin walls. I stopped, my heart pounding. "Insurance," Richard whispered. "It's enough to clear everything if we move quickly." Matthew's reply was harsh. "What if he suspects?" "He won't," Richard snapped. "He's old-tired. All we need is patience. By 70 it'll look natural. One drink, one mistake. No one will question it." My body turned to stone. I clung to the wall, my breath shallow, my mind spinning. Insurance. One drink, by 70. The words echoed in my skull until I thought I would go mad. They weren't just stealing. They weren't just scheming. They were planning the end of me. I stumbled back to my room, each step heavier than the last. My hands shook so violently I could barely close the door. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring into the dark. For hours I couldn't move, couldn't think, only heard their voices replaying. By 70. One drink. The next morning I tried to tell myself it was a nightmare, a trick of the mind. But when Richard approached me, his smile too wide, his hand resting on my shoulder, I felt the truth in my bones. "Dad," he said, "don't worry about anything. Just enjoy your birthday. We'll take care of everything." His words were sugar-coated poison. I forced a smile, but inside terror wrapped its claws around me. That was the twist, the moment when doubt became certainty. The birthday celebration was not a gift. It was a countdown. Every smile, every plan, every toast was leading to the moment they would raise a glass not to my life, but to my death. I carried that knowledge in silence, too afraid to confront them, too broken to call the police. These were my sons, my blood. How could I accuse them without tearing apart the last shreds of my family? But inside, I knew my 70th birthday would not be a celebration. It would be a test of survival. And you, if you heard your own children whispering of your death, if you caught them planning it like a business deal, would you believe your ears, or would you cling to hope and pretend you misheard? Comment 9 if you would believe the worst, or like if you would still try to hope the way I once did. The morning of my 70th birthday began with sunlight spilling across the faded curtains, but the light felt cruel, like it was mocking me. Birthdays are supposed to be days of joy, of family gathering to celebrate the years survived. Yet, as I sat on the edge of my bed tying my old shoes, I felt only dread. Every heartbeat echoed with the memory of those whispers. By 70. One drink. I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror above the dresser. The man staring back at me looked tired, older than 70, his eyes haunted by secrets no father should ever know about his children. The house smelled of cinnamon and sugar. My granddaughter Emma had been up early with her mother baking a cake, and for a brief moment, that sweet smell almost convinced me everything was normal. I walked into the kitchen and saw Emma grinning as she placed strawberries carefully on the frosting. "Happy birthday, Grandpa!" She said, her little voice like a bell in the silence. I hugged her tightly, holding on, longer than usual, afraid it might be the last time I would feel her arms around me. My daughter-in-law watched her smile soft, but behind her I saw Richard's shadow move through the hallway, his phone glued to his ear. His voice was sharp, businesslike. "Yes, today. Don't worry, it'll be done." The words struck me like ice water poured down my spine. He didn't see me watching, but I caught the smirk tugging at his lips when he ended the call. He stepped into the kitchen, kissed Emma on the head, and then clapped me on the back with forced enthusiasm. "Big day, Dad. Everyone's coming tonight. You'll have the best celebration of your life. The best celebration of my life." The way he said it made it sound like the last. Throughout the day, relatives began to arrive. Laughter floated through the house, but it felt hollow, rehearsed. Matthew moved among the guests like a man auditioning for sainthood, shaking hands, offering drinks, making sure everyone noticed his hospitality. But when his eyes met mine, there was something behind them, an impatience, a flicker of calculation. I remembered the night I caught him on the phone, promising money to someone I never met, and the bile rose in my throat. As evening fell, the house was crowded, music, playing, low glasses clinking. My neighbors, my cousins, even a few old friends from work came to wish me well. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of a stage, the final act about to begin. Every time a hand reached for my shoulder, or someone laughed too loudly, I flinched, expecting the dagger hidden in the smile. And then the toast. Richard stood at the head of the table, a tall figure in his expensive suit, his hair slicked back as if he were addressing investors, not family. 70 years. He began, raising his glass, is not just a number. It is a legacy. Our father has taught us resilient sacrifice and hard work. Tonight, we honor him." Applause filled the room. I tried to smile, but my hands trembled. Matthew poured wine into my glass, his fingers brushing mine. His eyes met mine for a fleeting second, and in that second, I saw its certainty. He knew what was in that glass. I stared at the crimson liquid shimmering under the lights. My throat tightened. The whispers came back. 1 drink. By 70. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the laughter. Just as I lifted the glass, Emma tugged at my sleeve. Her small voice barely carried above the noise, but I heard it clear as thunder. "Grandpa, don't drink the wine." The glass froze in my hand. My entire body went cold. I looked down at Emma. Her wide eyes shimmered with fear, not childish play, but fear real enough to freeze my blood. "Why not, sweetheart?" I asked softly. She leaned close, her lips brushing my ear. I heard Daddy and Uncle Matthew in the garage. They said it's the same thing they gave Grandma. The room spun. The same thing they gave Grandma. Eleanor's death had been sudden, explained away as a stroke. But in that moment, the puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. My sons hadn't just planned my death. They had already claimed 1 life in this family. My beloved wife had not died naturally. She had been murdered. I lowered the glass, forcing a cough to mask my trembling. Around me, guests cheered, raising their drinks, urging me to take a sip. Richard's eyes were on me, sharp and unblinking. Matthew smiled too wide, his teeth bared like a predator. I pressed the glass to my lips, pretending to drink, letting the wine touch, but not pass my tongue. Then I set it down, clinking it against the table, as though in triumph. The crowd erupted, fooled by the act, but inside, I was on fire. From that moment on, every gesture in the house felt like a trap. Richard urged me to eat more of the roast he had prepared. Matthew offered me another pour, insisting my glass looked too empty. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped my fork. Emma stayed close to me, her small hand clutching mine under the table. She knew. She had saved me. Later that night, when the guests began to leave, Richard cornered me in the hallway. His smile was gone, his voice low and sharp. "You didn't drink," he said. It wasn't a question. My chest tightened. I forced a laugh. At my age, Richard wine keeps me up at night. His eyes narrowed, studying me, searching for cracks. Then he leaned in so close I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Dad. One way or another, it ends tonight." I stumbled back into the living room, my mind reeling. Matthew was by the door, speaking quietly with 2 men I didn't recognize. They weren't family, they weren't neighbors. Their suits were too sharp, their gazes too cold. My gut twisted with the certainty that they were debt collectors the wolves Matthew had promised payment to. My sons had built their lives on lies, and now they were feeding me to those lies like a lamb to slaughter. The night dragged on like a nightmare with no waking. Every sound was too loud, every shadow too long. I couldn't rest, couldn't breathe, knowing that at any moment one of them might place a poisoned drink in my hand, or call it an accident when I fell down the stairs. I paced the kitchen, the walls closing in, the laughter of my guests fading into a sinister hum. And here is where you must step into my shoes. Imagine standing in your own home, surrounded by people smiling at you, celebrating you, while knowing in your heart that 2 of those smiles belong to murderers. What would you do? Would you confront them then and there, risking chaos in front of everyone? Or would you wait, playing their game until the evidence revealed itself? Comment yes if you would confront them immediately, or comment 8 if you would wait, as I did, because I wasn't ready yet. The house had grown quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that screams. Guests had left, balloons hung half deflated, and the smell of wine lingered heavy in the air. Only family remained. Richard was in the kitchen, stacking glasses with the precision of a man who couldn't sit still. Matthew paced the hallway, his phone buzzing in his hand, unanswered. Rose sat beside me on the couch, her small fingers gripping mine like an anchor. I could feel her trembling, though she tried to be strong. The night was supposed to be over, but I knew it wasn't. Not yet. I felt the weight of 70 years pressing on me, not as a celebration, but as a sentence. I had survived their trap, at least for the moment, but survival wasn't enough. The whispers, the stolen money, the forged papers, the poison in the glass, it all burned in my chest like fire. If I stayed silent, they would try again. And if they succeeded, my death would be written off as nature, a man too old for his own body. No one would know, no one would question. They would inherit everything and move on as though my life had been nothing but a stepping stone. I couldn't let that happen. Not after Eleanor, not after Rose. I stood, my knees aching, but my spine unbroken. I picked up the untouched glass of wine still sitting on the table, its surface catching the dim light. I walked slowly into the center of the room where both of my sons could see me. The clock ticked above the mantel each second, hammering louder in my ears. Richard looked up from the sink, his eyes narrowing. Matthew stopped pacing the phone, slipping from his hand. "Let's finish this," I said. My voice was steady, though my heart thundered. I raised the glass high. To family. Their eyes locked on the glass. Richard's jaw tightened. Matthew swallowed hard. I could see the flicker of panic, the calculation racing through their minds. They didn't expect me to challenge them. They expected fear, silence, weakness. Not this. I slammed the glass onto the table, shattering it into crimson shards. Wine sprayed across the wood, dripping to the floor like blood. The sound rang through the house, sharp as a gunshot. Rose gasped, covering her mouth. My sons froze, caught between denial and exposure. "Which one of you," I demanded, my voice rising, "wanted to bury me tonight?" Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Richard forced a laugh, but it cracked halfway through. "Dad, what are you talking about? You've had too much to drink." "Don't lie to me," I roared. "I heard you, both of you, talking about insurance, talking about 70, talking about one drink. Did you think I wouldn't recognize poison in my own glass?" Matthew's face went pale, his lips parting, but no words coming out. Richard's mask slipped for the briefest moment, his smile falling into a snarl. Then he stepped forward, his voice sharp. "You don't know what you're saying. You're old, confused. Stop embarrassing yourself." "Old," I spat. "Maybe, but not blind, not deaf, and not dead. Not yet. Tell me, Richard, was it you who killed your mother too? Or was that Matthew's contribution?" Rose let out a sob, clutching my arm. Matthew staggered back as though struck. Richard's face twisted, fury flashing in his eyes. "Don't you dare bring her into this," he snapped. His voice was louder now, angrier as if volume could drown out truth. "She's already in this," I said, pointing at the glass shards glittering on the table. "She's in every lie, every stolen dollar, every whisper in the dark. She died with your fingerprints on her soul, and now you wanted me to follow her." Matthew broke then. His voice cracked, his words tumbling out like rocks in a landslide. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he muttered, clutching his head. "I just needed money. I just needed time," Richard said. "Shut up," Richard roared, lunging at his brother. His hand closed around Matthew's collar, shaking him like a rag doll. "Don't you say a word. Not one damn word." I stepped forward, my voice cutting through their chaos. "Say it, Matthew. Say the truth." Tears spilled down his cheeks as he stammered. "It was Richard's idea. He said the insurance would fix everything. He said we just had to wait until 70, that no one would ever know. He promised it would look natural. I didn't know about Mom. I swear I didn't know." Richard shoved him away, his face red with rage. "You coward! You would throw me under to save yourself." "I would save my soul." Matthew choked, his knees buckling. The room erupted in screams, Rose crying, Matthew pleading, Richard shouting my voice, cutting through it all. I pointed at the broken glass, at the poison they had meant for me. "This ends now. You wanted my death. You wanted my silence. Tonight you face the truth. Tonight the world hears what you really are." I pulled my phone from my pocket, the record button glowing red. Their faces drained of color. They hadn't noticed me started earlier, hadn't realized their own words were already captured. Insurance. One drink by 70. Their voices echoed from the speaker, undeniable, damning. Richard lunged for me, fury twisting his features, but Rose leapt between us, her arms spread wide. "No!" she screamed. "You won't hurt him. Not tonight. Not ever again." The sound of sirens pierced the night air. I had called the police before raising that final toast, my trembling fingers dialing, as Emma distracted the room. The flashing lights cut through the windows, red and blue painting the walls. Richard froze, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. Matthew collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. Officers stormed through the door shouts, filling the house. In moments, my sons were pulled apart, wrists bound in cold steel. Richard fought, cursing my name, while Matthew wept into his hands. I stood there, my breath ragged, my heart pounding. The house that had once been filled with laughter now echoed with screams and sirens. My family was broken, shattered beyond repair. But in that moment, as Richard's eyes burned into mine and Matthew's cries filled the room, I felt something I hadn't in years: power, dignity, justice. The confrontation was brutal, louder than I ever imagined, but necessary. They wanted me gone, buried in silence. Instead, I stood in the light, and their darkness was dragged into the open. So, I ask you now, if you had been me, if your own children had plotted your death, would you have destroyed them in front of the world, or would you have stayed silent to protect the illusion of family? Comment yes if you would have stood tall like I did. Or comment 9 if you think silence is worth more than truth. When the sirens faded and the house fell silent again, I stood among the wreckage of what once was my family. The balloons sagged, the candles burned low, and the shards of glass still glistened on the table like a battlefield of red wine and broken trust. Richard and Matthew were gone, taken in handcuffs, their voices still echoing in my ears. Richard's fury, Matthew's sobs. Rose sat beside me, her hands trembling, her eyes swollen from crying. Emma leaned against her mother in the corner, too young to understand the full weight of what had happened, but old enough to know that something had shattered beyond repair. I felt both heavier and lighter. Heavier because I had lost my sons, lighter because the truth no longer strangled me in silence. Dignity is not given, it is defended, and tonight, for the first time in years, I had defended mine. Yet victory in a family war tastes bitter. I had uncovered their plot, I had survived their poison, but in doing so, I had buried what little remained of the illusion that we were whole. In the weeks that followed, the news spread like wildfire. The community was stunned. Neighbors who once waved politely from across the fence now whispered, pointing at my house. The Hale brothers, they said, who tried to kill their own father. My name became both tragedy and warning, a reminder that betrayal can sprout even in the soil of love. The trial was long and merciless. Evidence mounted: forged signatures, bank withdrawals, recordings of conversations, and finally the toxicology report on Eleanor. The truth came out piece by piece, tearing at me like claws. She hadn't died of natural causes. She had been poisoned slowly, her life drained by the same sons she trusted. I sat in the courtroom clutching the armrest as the doctor explained how the symptoms had been missed, how cleverly it had been done. My Eleanor, the woman who had given her life for them, taken by their greed. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped behind my teeth. When the verdict was read guilty on all counts, I felt no triumph, only sorrow. Richard glared at me as they led him away, his eyes burning with hatred. Matthew wept openly, begging for forgiveness, his body shaking as the guards pulled him from the room. They had different faces of guilt, but in the end, guilt is guilt, and betrayal is betrayal. Rose stood by me through it all. She became my strength, just as her mother once had been. Every night she checked on me, made sure I ate, made sure I slept. Sometimes I caught her crying quietly when she thought I wasn't looking, mourning not just her brothers, but the family that could never be again. I would place my hand on hers, whispering, "We still have each other," and that was enough to keep both of us standing. In time, I rebuilt not in bricks or money, but in dignity. I donated part of what remained of my savings to a foundation in Eleanor's name, a fund for widows and orphans, because I wanted her legacy to be more than the crime that took her. Her face now hangs in the local church, framed by candles lit every Sunday by those who remember her kindness. That is how I honor her, not with revenge, but with remembrance. As for me, I live quietly now. My hands still shake sometimes when I lift a glass. I no longer trust the clink of crystal, no longer see wine as a drink, but as a weapon. Yet I walk with my head high because I face the darkness in my own blood and refuse to bow. I am Thomas Hale, 70 years old. I was meant to die on my birthday, buried by the greed of my sons, but I lived. And in living, I exposed them, stripped away their lies, and claimed back my dignity. If you listen closely, betrayal always carries a whisper before the scream. I ignored those whispers once, and it cost me Eleanor. I listened the second time, and it saved my life. Perhaps that is the cruel lesson of age, that trust is sacred, but vigilance is survival. Now I turn to you, the ones hearing my confession. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent to protect the illusion of family? Or would you have torn away the mask to reveal the monsters behind it? For me, the answer was clear, though it shattered my heart. I chose truth. I chose dignity. I chose life. If you believe that dignity is worth more than blood, if you believe truth is stronger than betrayal, then comment the number 1 below. Because in the end, survival is not just about breathing, it is about standing tall, even when those closest to you want to see you fall.